Snow lashed against the high cliffs as the wind screamed through the Bitterroot Mountains. The path was narrow, carved by deer and stubborn men, but now only one soul treaded, a woman, heavy with child, her dress torn and soaked through. She leaned against a jagged boulder, one arm wrapped around her swollen belly, the other clutching a rust-specked revolver, too cold to grip. Blood darkened her hem. Her name was Mara Callahan, and she had been running for 2 days. Her breath came in clouds, ragged and fast. She'd buried her husband a week ago with rocks and prayers, then fled before the Baldwin gang could close in. They were men without mercy, loyal once to Jude Callahan, the outlaw who had tried to vanish into an honest life. But honor bought no favor in the frontier. The Baldwins believed Jude left behind gold. They believed Mara knew where it was buried, and they wanted it badly enough to chase a pregnant widow through a blizzard. A gunshot echoed down the pass, distant, but real. Mara flinched and pressed onward, boots crunching against frozen shale. Her strength was fading fast. The mountains cared nothing for justice. Each step felt like dragging a stone. Her body betrayed her, too near to the end of the long, secret journey she'd shared with Jude. He had promised they'd start fresh in Montana, but he died with the map still in his coat, and now she had only a child inside her and a trail of killers behind. When her knees buckled, she didn't rise. The snow wrapped her like a shroud. She curled into herself, teeth chattering, vision dimming. Somewhere a crow cawed. The world narrowed to the sound of her own breathing, shallow and panicked. Then light. A flicker. A warm glow not born of hallucination, but from a cabin set low beneath the rise, its chimney coughing a thread of smoke into the gray sky. She blinked against the blur of snow, unsure if it was real. When her fingers felt the crust of frozen steps beneath her palms, she knew it was. The door creaked open before she could knock. A tall man filled the doorway, wearing a threadbare coat and a broad hat that shadowed half his face. One eye glinted beneath the brim, the other was hidden behind a patch of worn leather. He didn't speak at first, just studied her with the calm of a man used to seeing desperate things. She tried to speak. No sound came. He stepped aside without a word. She dragged herself inside, collapsing near the hearth. Heat touched her face, savage and sudden. The man shut the door behind her and knelt beside her. "You'll lose the child if you don't stop shaking," he said, voice low and steady. "You hurt anywhere else?" Mara nodded vaguely, clinging to consciousness. "They're behind me," she whispered. "Men with guns. Bad ones." "I figured," he said, tossing a heavy quilt over her shoulders. "Nobody climbs my ridge in a storm unless they're running from something." She tried to sit up, failed. "You have to hide me." "I ain't hiding anyone. But I will shelter you. There's a difference." He stoked the fire with calm precision, then ladled broth from a pot hung over the flames. The cabin was small but sturdy, built from pine logs that had seen many winters. A bear pelt hung near the door. Rifles leaned against the wall, cleaned and oiled. He handed her a tin cup. "Drink slow. You're colder than death." She obeyed. The warmth ran through her like melted copper, painful and good. "Who are you?" He hesitated before answering. "Name's Ezekiel Dunn. Folks used to call me Zeke." "You live out here?" "Only place where men stop asking about the past." Mara's eyes drifted to the saber above the mantel, its handle worn smooth, a Union crest faint but visible. Her voice was small. "You were a soldier." "I was a lot of things," he replied. "None of 'em good." The wind howled against the shutters. Zeke stood and peered through a crack in the timber. His eye narrowed. "They ain't far." "How many?" she asked. "5. Maybe 6. Riding hard, but careful. Smelling blood, not wanting to step in it." He turned back to her. "They'll find this place by nightfall." "Please," she said. "If not for me, then for the child." He studied her a long moment. Then he nodded once and moved to the table, unrolling a canvas satchel filled with iron teeth and twine. "I can hold 'em off," he said. "For a while. You'll die. Maybe. But I'd rather do that helping someone than freezing alone out here, waiting for the world to forget me." She blinked hard against the tears. "Thank you." Zeke didn't look at her as he began laying traps with mechanical precision. Don't thank me yet. Just do what I tell you when the time comes. Mara leaned back against the stones of the hearth, her eyes closing. The fire popped and hissed. Outside, the storm screamed. Somewhere in the dark, 5 men rode with death in their hearts. And one man, long forgotten by war and time, stood ready to meet them. The fire burned low by morning, a steady orange glow casting long shadows across the cabin walls. Mara stirred beneath the quilt, pain flaring in her lower back, her breath catching in shallow bursts. She wasn't sure if the contractions had started or if her body was still trying to recover from the mountain's cruelty. Either way, something inside her was shifting. Zeke Dunn moved with silent efficiency, already dressed and lacing his boots with a soldier's habit. He'd been up before dawn, checking snares, sharpening blades, watching the ridge. When he returned to the cabin, his eyes settled on Mara with a glance that measured more than it revealed. "How do you feel?" he asked, voice rough from the cold. "Like I swallowed gravel and got stepped on by a mule," she muttered. "Then you're still alive," he said. "Good sign." She sat up slowly, wincing. "Why are you helping me?" Zeke poured a tin cup of boiled water steeped with pine needles and placed it in her hands. "Because you knocked, and because it ain't the first time I've seen the wrong people get hunted for the wrong reasons." Mara sipped. The tea was bitter but warm. "You speak like a man who's seen a lot of wrong." He didn't answer. Instead, he opened a small chest beside the fireplace and removed a bundle wrapped in oilskin. Inside was a rifle, not the battered kind used by ranchers or trappers, but a long, well-kept Henry repeater with careful engravings worn nearly smooth. He checked the chamber, loaded 5 rounds in quiet rhythm, then slung it over his shoulder. "I saw your saber," she said. Zeke paused. "Most folks don't notice. My husband was a soldier once. Ran from it. Said the war carved up more than just the land." "That's truth," Zeke said. "I rode out under the stars and came back with ghosts in every pocket." "You talk like a general." "I was a colonel." She looked at him, really looked, trying to imagine the man he must have been. The rough beard, the leathery skin, the 1,000-yard stare. It was easy to believe he had once commanded men. Harder to believe he had chosen exile in a place where the wind never stopped howling. "My name is Mara Callahan," she said. He nodded. "I know the name. Jude Callahan. Wanted in 6 territories." He tried to change. "We were on our way to the Bitterroot Basin. He thought we could start over. He buried the gold somewhere near Timberline Ridge before the Baldwins turned on him." Zeke's brow furrowed. "He left you the map?" "No," she said bitterly. "He left me a child in a death sentence." Zeke turned to the window, scanning the tree-line. "They'll push up from the south slope. Quieter than coming through the gulch, but riskier. I've set snares there. If they get careless, we'll hear the first one scream." "You really think we can hold them off?" "Not forever," he said, "but long enough." "For what?" He looked at her with something colder than resignation. "For you to run, if it comes to that." She bristled. "I'm not leaving. Not again. I'm done running." Zeke didn't argue. He simply began his work, stringing traps, melting tallow for bullet molds, checking powder stores. The cabin became a theater of preparation, every movement purposeful. Mara tried to help, folding bandages, fetching water, but her body protested at every step. She leaned against the doorframe as he drove iron stakes into the earth with quiet force. "You ever kill a man?" he asked, not looking up. "Yes," she said after a pause. "Once. In Kansas. He tried to drag me off a train car. I stabbed him in the throat with a broken bottle." Zeke nodded, as if confirming something he already suspected. "Then you know what kind of eyes to watch for." "I know desperation," she said. "I see it every time I look in a mirror." By afternoon, the clouds thinned and left behind a pale stretch of sky. The storm had passed, but it left no comfort, only clarity. Footprints would show. Smoke would rise. And soon, death would follow. Mara sat near the fire, staring into the embers. Her hands curled around her belly as the baby kicked, stubborn, alive, unaware of the world waiting to devour it. "Do you have family?" she asked Zeke. He didn't look up from the whetstone dragging across his blade. I did. Once. What happened? The war. Then pride. Then time. She said nothing, letting the silence stretch. Outside, a hawk cried overhead. The trees were still. Zeke finally spoke. There was a town, Sabine Ridge. Burned it myself on a general's orders. Said it was sheltering Confederate raiders. Found only women and children. They called me the butcher after that. Didn't stick around to wear the name long. Mara looked at him, startled. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to know the kind of man who's going to protect you, he said. Not a good one. Just a man who's done worse than your pursuers ever dreamed of. You regret it? He let the blade rest. Every night. But some stains never wash out. All you can do is make sure the next fire burns the right people. As dusk crept in, Zeke stood at the window again, his silhouette tall against the fading light. They're close now, he said quietly. I saw a glint of metal in the trees. Maybe an hour away. Mara's throat tightened. What do we do? Zeke turned, his eye unreadable. We wait. And when it starts, you listen to me. Not your fear. Not your pain. Me. She nodded slowly. Then the first gunshot cracked across the ridge. The moment of stillness had passed. The game had begun. The gunshot split the stillness like a bone cracking in the frost. Zeke didn't flinch. He crouched by the window, finger pressed to the frame, tracking movement through the snow-draped pines. Mara clutched her belly, every nerve taut, her eyes flicking between Zeke and the door. They're testing the line, he murmured, probing to see if we spook. How many? She asked, her voice hoarse. 5. Maybe 4 now if the snare held. Mara thought of the crunch of metal jaws, of the trap Zeke had rigged with a carpenter's ruthlessness. She didn't ask for details. Blood would tell soon enough. The baby twisted in her belly, a sudden, hot jab that stole her breath. She pressed a hand to her side, lips clamped tight. It's starting, she whispered. Zeke didn't look back. Then we don't have much time. Another shot rang out, closer, sharper. It struck the roof beam with a dry thwack, sending splinters across the hearth. Mara ducked instinctively, her breath shallow. Zeke moved like a wolf. He pulled the Henry from its perch and slipped through the back door, vanishing into the snow without a word. Mara waited, heart hammering, pulse pounding in her temples. Silence followed. Then a sharp scream tore through the trees, high and short, ending in a sickening crunch. One less rider. She shifted closer to the fire, sweat prickling despite the cold. Her hands trembled. The child was coming, slow but steady, and the weight of that reality pressed harder than the man outside. She wanted to scream. Instead, she bit down and braced herself. Zeke returned moments later, rifle in hand, boots soaked, his eye grim. One caught his leg in the trap and broke his neck trying to twist free. They'll be angrier now. Is that better or worse? She asked through clenched teeth. Both, he said. They'll charge soon. Sloppy loud. I'll get 2, maybe 3 before they reach the door. Then it'll be steel and blood. He handed her a knife, short, broad, and cold. For what? She asked, fingers wrapped around the worn hilt. In case they get past me. Or in case you need to cut the cord when the time comes. Mara looked at him, stricken. I've delivered calves. Never a child, he said flatly. But I'll do what I can. Outside, the wind shifted. The sound of hooves pounding snow broke the silence. Zeke moved to the porch, crouched low, and raised the Henry to his shoulder. Through a gap in the logs, Mara could just make out the riders, 3 now, riding hard, guns drawn, eyes wide with fury. Zeke fired once. A rider dropped from the saddle, crumpling into the snow. He fired again. Missed. The third came fast, close enough for Mara to see the snarl on his face before Zeke threw the rifle aside and yanked a hatchet from his belt. The 2 men collided near the woodpile. Zeke ducked the pistol's flash and brought the blade down in a brutal arc flesh split. Bone cracked. The outlaw fell backward with a gurgle, staining the snow black. A 4th man surged from the trees, screaming Jude Callahan's name like a curse. He slammed into Zeke from behind, driving both into the snow. They rolled, fists flying, boots scraping ice. Zeke grunted as the man landed a blow, then jammed his elbow into the outlaw's throat. He rose, breathing hard, blood trickling from his brow. Then a gunshot close. Not Zeke's. Mara screamed as the front window shattered inward. The last outlaw had flanked him, crawling low, and now he burst through the door like a devil on fire. His eyes were wild, his pistol already swinging toward her. Mara didn't think. She moved. The knife plunged forward with all her weight behind it. It struck below his ribs. He gasped, eyes wide, staggered, then fell to his knees. She ripped the blade free, and the man collapsed in a pool of his own making. Zeke stormed in seconds later, wild-eyed and slick with snow. "Are you hurt?" She looked down at the blood, then at the knife still in her hand. "No," she said, "but I think the baby is coming. Now." Zeke nodded once. "Then we make this place a fortress. Just for tonight." He pushed a table against the door, dragged the dead man's body into the corner, and threw more wood into the fire. His motions were practiced, controlled, but his hands shook when he passed her a strip of linen. "You still with me?" he asked. "I don't have a choice," she said. "Neither do I," he replied. The siege was over, but the true battle was just beginning. The child came with the first light, fierce, red-faced, and wailing into a world that had nearly killed them both. Mara bit down on the edge of a blanket, her cry muffled but sharp, as Zeke guided the infant free with hands hardened by war and wilderness. Snow fell outside, soft and soundless, blanketing the bloody footprints and broken trails of the night before. He didn't speak when he wrapped the baby in flannel and placed her into Mara's trembling arms. His hands were still stained with soot and blood, but they moved gently now, as if afraid of breaking something sacred. The fire crackled behind them, casting flickers of gold across the cabin walls. "She's strong," Mara whispered, voice hoarse with exhaustion. "Stubborn, like her father." Zeke studied the infant. She didn't cry long. "That's good. She's got a fighter's lungs, but she's already watching. She's got your scowl." He almost smiled. "God help her, then." They sat in silence for a while. The storm passed. The child nestled in her mother's arms like a flicker of hope in the ash of ruin. Outside, the land lay still, untouched by the fire and violence that had spilled over it hours ago. The trees bore witness, but gave no judgment. Later, when Zeke buried the outlaws in a shallow grave out past the creek, he marked their names with nothing but stones. He worked in silence, his breath clouding in the cold, the weight of what had passed lingering in his spine. He left one cross unmarked, for Jude Callahan, the outlaw who had wanted to run from his past but hadn't made it to redemption. A man cursed by blood and treasure. Mara stood nearby, the baby swaddled against her chest, watching. She didn't speak. She just laid a small, tattered glove atop the unmarked grave before walking back to the cabin. The gold Jude had buried would stay where it was. Let the mountains keep it. Let it rot with the bones of greed and betrayal. What mattered now was breath, firelight, and survival. A week passed before the snow began to melt in earnest. Zeke chopped wood each morning, kept the traps set, and boiled herbs for Mara's healing. The baby, whom Mara named Rose, after the last flower her mother had ever planted, grew louder by the day. Zeke built her a cradle from pine and whittled her name into the headboard when he thought no one was watching. "You planning to disappear when the trail clears?" Mara asked one evening, her eyes fixed on the flames. He didn't answer at first. The firelight danced in his one good eye, and the shadows on his face looked older than time. "I thought I might," he said, "but I've been running so long, I wouldn't know what to do if I stopped." "You stopped the night you opened your door," she said. "Don't you see that?" Zeke didn't reply, but the next morning he tacked leather to the barn's old door, fixed a roofline, and started planting hardy seeds near the south wall where the sun lingered longest. That was answer enough. News reached the hills weeks later, carried by a drifter with an ear for whispers. The Baldwin gang was finished. The last of them had turned on each other over the gold's rumored location. Lawmen found bodies strung across the timberline trail. No one ever came looking for Mara or her child. But rumors grew, like all things in the frontier. They told of a widow with outlaw blood who birthed a child under siege, and of a scarred mountain man who fought off 4 killers and vanished into the snow. Some said he was a deserter from the war. Others claimed he was death himself, hiding in the trees, waiting to balance the scales. No one could quite agree. Only one thing was certain: strangers didn't go near that ridge anymore. Years later, a young girl with her mother's grit and her guardian's quiet eyes would ride into a dusty town with goods to trade. Folks would watch her walk tall through the street, rifle slung over one shoulder, a strange glint in her gaze. When asked her name, she'd say, "Rose Callahan Dunn," and nothing more. But the old-timers, the ones who still remember the siege at dawn, would nod slowly and whisper, "The legend lives on." And in the hills where snow still came early and stayed late, an old cabin stood against the wind, its hearth warm, its walls carved with stories that no one dared forget.